ride shows us many things. It's really good, lovely, wide open ride. You can see the sun streaming in. Fantastic for plants and for lots of our butterflies and moth species as well, and lots of other invertebrates respond well. And it can also create great foraging habitat for our bird species and our bat species. So opening up rides is a great way to create more light, let more light in, and that will encourage lots of plants and butterflies into your woodlands. But you can't always create the exact ideal. So for us, this ride's lovely and open, but maybe a bit too open, because it can become a bit of a wind tunnel if you've just got straight lines. So in an ideal world, you'd create some scalloped edges, so you'd have like some wavy edges, create some little clearings so that can create more light but also sheltered habitats. Also some pinch points, so where the crown of the trees meet in the middle, or you get some scrub coming in, so you have more of a wavy edge profile, and that's really good for the bat species and also the bird species. Some of them don't really like it when it's so open and they have no shelter when they've got to fly from side to side. Sometimes though you have to work with what you can get your landowners to agree with. So if straight lines are your only option, it can be good to open up some habitat, and then you can let the scrub grow up to create some pinch points at a later date. The ideal for creating nice ride open habitats is to create a 3-stage or 3-layer ride structure. So you've got in the middle, you've got a really sort of low grass open habitat, which is probably mown annually, and then either side of that you can have much longer grass, which is great for some of our invertebrates and creates lots of nice shelter for them and foraging habitats, and then a scrubby edge before you hit the high forest canopy. And the scrubby edge is great again for lots of invertebrates, but also for lots of the bird species that like utilising that habitat. Areas of bare ground like this can be fantastic habitat for a number of plant species, and as well for some of our butterfly species who like laying their eggs on plants above this bare ground, because it creates a really nice microhabitat, warm area for their eggs to develop. And these bare ground areas are often created through the management work, so through the clearing or the cutting, you'll get these areas of bare ground. So don't worry if you have ruts and bare ground like this on your site, they're actually fantastic habitat. Once we've created all this lovely open habitat for a number of species, is to try and maintain it as open habitat. So if you don't do anything, then eventually it will just scrub over and trees will take over and it will become dark again actually pretty quickly. So we've implemented a system of rotational mowing. Again, you don't want to mow all at the same time, because then you'll take out all the vegetation where different vertebrates might be living. So we try and do it on a rotational basis. So the centre section will be cut annually because it's a path, so people will need to be able to use it. But then either side of that, we'll mow one side 1 year and then the other side the following year. You can do it on slightly longer rotations. You could do a 3 to 4 year rotation as well if that's more suitable. But again, what you're aiming for is your 3-zone structure in an ideal world, where you'd have your centre ride mown annually. Either side of that you'd have some areas of long grass which would be mown maybe every other year or every 3 years, and then further to that you have your scrub zone, and that might even be looking at cutting that every 10 years. Again, on a rotational basis, so you've got a variety and a mosaic of habitats throughout the ride system.
Okay, so we talked about how it's important to have some open rides to obviously increase insect abundance and diversity, but it's also good to retain some dark sort of covered rides. So rides like this, where you've got the trees canopy reaching over, it's forming a sort of darker habitat, great for some of our woodland bat species that prefer to have that cover that keeps them safe from predators that are flying around. Also, for some butterfly species and other taxa, they have a preference for that dapple sunshine that a dark ride like this provides. This is a perfect example of a dead standing wood or tree. It's a very important tree to retain in a woodland. As you can see, there's lots of loose bark on this tree, and around the back you can see this plate of loose bark that's coming off from the main trunk. Now this kind of feature is very important for one of our primary target bat species, the barbastel. They favour this kind of loose bark feature for roosting in. They will also use loose bark on other tree species, but their favoured tree species is oak. And obviously here we've got a lovely example. They will also utilise cracks, crevices and cavities on oak, but also other tree species which they were used to forage in. So it is very important to retain and keep standing deadwood like this, or dying standing deadwood in a woodland environment, rather than clearing it away. Allow it to develop those features that the bats can use as for roosting, but also keep the loose bark that's already there so that the bats can use them. It's quite a fragile feature, so it won't last forever. So it's really important to ensure that you keep a succession of dead dying trees, and also live trees that support these kind of features, but also to keep them so that they can develop those features over time to provide roosting opportunities for our bats. On a site where you've got a lot of young trees and you haven't got many older mature trees that will support features that bats might use, like the loose bark or the cavities and woodpecker holes and crevices, you can use veterinisation techniques to mimic those features. So basically using tools instead of time. And over here, down here, we've actually created a lightning strike feature down the tree. Younger trees really should be used when you're using veterinisation techniques. You shouldn't be doing veterinisation techniques on ancient or mature trees. Younger trees have a better chance of surviving and coping with such an adverse intervention, really, work on them. And what we're hoping to achieve with the lightning strike is that over time, as the tree starts to mature and gets older, what we should see is decaying occurring, and potentially the bark should sort of lift away from the main tree. We should maybe see some what we call Ransholm effect, where the bark curls in, and then we'll get gaps behind the bark, and that will provide sort of crevices and cavities for the bats to crawl into, and potentially over time be a roost for some of our bat species that use this site. When carrying out any veterinisation techniques on our trees, make sure it's going to be sustainable and it's going to be for the right reason, and make sure that you are doing these, carrying out these techniques on trees with arborists who have a better knowledge of cutting the right features in the tree. So it's not something to carry out without doing the right amount of research. So this here is an example of a closed canopy habitat with a sort of a cluttered understory layer. Now obviously we're at a time of year when there's not a lot of leaves on the trees at this stage, but this kind of habitat's actually quite important for two of our primary target species, the barbastel and the brown long-eared bat. So if you've got both species on your site, then it's really important to retain this understory clutter. For brown long-eared bats, they like to, this would be a key foraging area, and they like to forage quite close to their roost, so anything between 1 to 3 kilometers from their roost area. So it is important habitat to retain and leave as minimum intervention. Allow obviously for native understory to develop through natural regeneration if possible, of varied ages as well, so you've got different trees, shrubs and trees of different ages, yeah, allow it to just naturally form, and this will be a key foraging area. When it comes for barbastale, for some sites, barbastales are found to favour roosts that are located in dense, cluttered understory. This is because the understory layer provides a buffer, right environmental conditions, such as low air intake and high humidity, and this obviously is what the bats, barbastale bat, are looking for when they're looking for key roosting areas. Barbastales will also utilise this cluttered understory as foraging, for foraging. This is because when it's just starting to get dark, they will emerge a bit earlier, and they will take advantage of the dark zone within the understory to get a few minutes extra of feeding, so great feeding opportunity. And then when the commuting routes outside the dark zone have got darker, then they'll head out along their routes and fly to their key foraging areas. So not only important to retain this sort of understory clutter, but also try and consider having some mature trees staggered throughout the habitat, because obviously they over time will form features that will become roosts for the bats. A cluttered understory layer like this is also good for other taxa such as marsh tits, which will utilise such a habitat. If you have a key foraging area within here in such a habitat, it is also important to manage it on a minimum intervention, so that the trees within there can develop naturally, and old age habitat can also develop naturally. So here we have a beautiful example of a veteran ash tree. A great habitat on its own for a range of different invertebrates, but also, as you can see, lots and lots of holes, cracks and crevices that will form potential roosting opportunities for our bats species. So for this tree, really, it should be left alone. There shouldn't be any need to disturb it or manage it. Just make sure, obviously, that you retain a buffer of vegetation around the tree to maintain the right environmental conditions, and also ensure it is connected and linked to the woodland behind, so it's not isolated from the woodland, so that wildlife that are using the tree can access other parts of the woodland site.
Okay, so if you've got a really dense woodland with trees planted really close together, it's worth considering thinning them out, so taking out some of those larger stems, because that would really help promote the understory. As you can see behind me, some really fantastic habitat coming up there with lots of variety, and that will develop a really nice structure, and that's fantastic for quite a lot of species, invertebrates. Marsh tit particularly loves this sort of habitat, and also good foraging habitat for some of the bat species. Alright, so this is a great example of a lovely tree with lots of ivy on it, and you really want to retain this where possible. Ivy is a great habitat for lots of, and gets used by lots and lots of invertebrates. It can also provide great nesting habitat for spotted flycatcher, and it can, if it's old ivy and really sort of thick and gnarly, it can also be used as a temporary roost for bats.
So this is an area of natural birch regeneration that we've cleared, and the reason for clearing areas of woodland, there are multiple. So by clearing the area you let more light to the ground floor. That enables more plant species to grow. Once you've got a greater productivity of different plant species, you've got more opportunities for different invertebrates, both because they've got the food of plants but also the light and the warmth as well. And then it's also beneficial for adder. So here we've got some of the brash and arisings that have been generated as we've cleared this area of sort of scrubby woodland to create more clearings for adder and other species. And we've heaped this stuff up into structures known as windrows. And these structures are really, really useful for lots of things. I mean, first of all, as they decompose and break down, they're food for invertebrates, which in turn are food for other things. But for our adder, these can also become useful structures to overwinter in, or to take refuge from predators in. The way these windrows have been constructed, we've aligned them east to west so that there's a south-facing edge. So if reptiles, for example, are taking refuge in here, when they emerge they've got a south-facing edge to come out onto in order to bask and to warm up, to enable them to get to the temperature that they need to be for their metabolism and so that they can do their activities. So in conservation we talk a lot about edge habitats and the interface between different kinds of habitat types. So here you've got some very short vegetation, very open habitat, which then merges into much taller vegetation, which has got the protective effect of bramble and other bits of shrubby species coming through. And this is great for all sorts of different species, but in particular when we're thinking about adder, edges with a south-facing aspect like this are fantastic basking opportunities. So very often we'll find adder basking on south-facing slopes that have got this nice interface between low habitat and the sort of taller vegetation, and you'll just find them just tucked in amongst the bramble and the taller vegetation. So they're receiving that sunlight but they're still protected from predation.
So yeah, we've shown you a variety of different habitats and management types that you could possibly do in your woodland, as well as a few of the woodland features. But we're really lucky here. It's a big site, so there's lots of scope for doing lots of different things in different areas. So some open areas, but also some minimum intervention areas. Not always going to be possible if you've got a small site, so just important to find out what's there in the first place or what has been there in the recent past, and decide what you want to achieve and then manage it for those species.